FPL Game Week 29 transfer plans. I'm personally not using a free hit in Game Week 29, so I'll be trying to run through it with the use of free transfers. So let's take a look at how I plan on doing so in this video. Hey everyone, Sam here, otherwise known as FPL Pricey. In today's video, I will be running through my transfer plans as I look to navigate blank Game Week 29 with the use of transfers rather than using a free hit to do so. Now, I personally have 4 players in my side that don't have a fixture in Game Week 29. For those of you who don't know already, the 4 teams that have a blank game week are Liverpool, Aston Villa, Newcastle and Crystal Palace. The reason for that is because of Liverpool and Newcastle's involvement in the Carabao Cup final, creating a postponement for those 2 individual sides in Game Week 29, and of course the corresponding opponent in their fixture also has to blank. I've got 4 players: Salah, Trent, Isak and Hall, so 2 from Newcastle, 2 from Liverpool. Hall is of course out for the season, but I'm looking at wildcarding in Game Week 31, so I only really need to navigate the next 2 game weeks, that being 29 and then Game Week 30. Game Week 30 could have been a good wildcard window, but given that we'll only have just gotten the results of the FA Cup a couple of days before that, I'm not so sure that I'll know when the blanks and the doubles will lie in the rest of the season, and therefore what wildcard side would look best for my team. So it's likely I'll need to use transfers to navigate Game Week 30 and then probably wildcard in Game Week 31. Now, looking at my team as it stands for Game Week 29, I've got 2 free transfers ready to use. I think I will definitely need to use both of them. And I've got 10 players who currently have a fixture. Technically got 11, but Valdemarson is obviously my bench keeper, so he doesn't really count. In my back line, I've got Pickford in goal at home to West Ham. That's one of the better keepers to have this week, so I'm happy with that. In defence, I've got Robinson at home to Tottenham. Not great there. Gabriel at home to Chelsea. I think I'll take it, but I'm not over the moon with it. And Greaves is definitely the weak spot there at home to Nottingham Forest. We'll come on to him and my plans to maybe upgrade that defender in a moment's time. In my midfield, I've got Palmer away at Arsenal. Now, obviously, his form has dropped off a bit of a cliff recently anyway, and it's not a great fixture. And Burmo away at Bournemouth, and then the 2 Bournemouth midfielders, Cliver and Semenyo, at home to Brentford. So again, I've got 4 players starting there. Salah obviously doesn't have a fixture and is currently in my starting lineup just through necessity. And Palmer doesn't have a great fixture either. Up top, I've got Chris Wood at the very least away at Ipswich. Would currently have the armband given the fixtures on the table for those 10 starters. And Pedro away at Man City. A few weeks ago, he was on the chopping block and I was happy to get rid of him ahead of Game Week 29. Now, it's looking like a little bit of a saviour at this point in time. Happy to have him, even if it's against Man City. He's been starting recently, and even though there's been a couple of penalties in there, he's at least getting some attack and returns. So I think I'm going to have to make peace, maybe, with starting Pedro this week. But given the form he's in, I don't think it's the worst thing in the world. And just in case you don't remember the earlier fixture this season between Brighton and Man City, João Pedro came off the bench, and I believe he got a goal and an assist in that game in just half an hour or 20 minutes at the end. So he's got a bit of form for it. Looking elsewhere, let's take a look at my transfer plans going into Game Week 29. There's a number of different routes. I think I'm going to run you through 4 individual ones to help me try and navigate the blank. Right then, so I've jumped over to fpl.team, which is of course a fantastic website, totally free. I'd go and check it out if you get the chance. Peter, who runs the site, does an incredible job of updating it and running through the permutations over the next few game weeks, not just the week ahead of you. I've of course got Game Week 29 up in front of me, but the reason I wanted to use FPL Team was so I can have a look ahead to Game Week 30 and how my transfers this week also affect next game week, because any transfers I use this week also need to apply for Game Week 30 before I then wildcard in Game Week 31. So taking a look quickly, this is my bus team as it were right now. I've got the 10 starters. I've still got Salah having to start given I don't have any bench options. So let's start having a look at option number 1. Now, option number 1, hopefully on screen now, would be to bring in Haaland. Will be a popular one this week, of course, but I'll need to find the money to do so. So if I take out Alexander Isak, which would have to be the likely player that comes out, I'll upgrade him to Haaland to just show how much money that I'd need to save. 4.9 million isn't going to be easy to get to, but if I did make that transfer, at the very least, it gets me up to 11 starters. So To find that 4.9 million, option number one would, of course, be to sell Mo Salah, who doesn't have a fixture this game week. But given that I've got over 1 million tied up in value in him, I don't really want to get rid of him because getting back to him will be very difficult to do so. And although he might not be a preferred captaincy option in too many of the final game weeks, given the doubles for other teams, I still don't want to remove that option and give myself a bit of a hard time getting back to him if I were to sell him now, because I'm not ready to get rid of him just yet. So Salah, I think, probably stays for me personally. I understand why others might be getting rid of him, and far better managers than me have suggested it, so don't rule it out by any means. However, for my team, I can actually get rid of Cole Palmer relatively comfortably and leave Mo Salah on the bench this week. So if I were to get rid of Cole Palmer, I've got 6 million to replace him without needing a hit to do so. Now, my preferred option would probably be Anthony Elanga. The reason for that is because it would also give me 0.7 million in the bank that will come in handy in game week 30. Obviously, this week, away at Ipswich is a great fixture. He's been getting good minutes. The data's not incredible, but given he's only 5.3 million, I think he's good value for money, and Nottingham Forest have a good fixture. The other thing to note with Anthony Elanga is, of course, Chris Wood's ownership is going to be very high this week. He's going to be captained by a lot of managers, and of course, the ownership was high anyway. So I'm not really going to get any benefit out of just owning Chris Wood from that Nottingham Forest attack against what is a pretty poor defence. If I bought in Anthony Elanga, then at the very least, I will get the benefit of his points rather than Chris Wood's, and as a combination, I'll get a little bit of a kick if Nottingham Forest beat Ipswich, most likely anyway. Now, of course, with using just 2 free transfers, Greaves has to start this game week, but I do avoid the hit. On the bench would stay Mo Salah, who I've got a lot of value tied up in, Alexander-Arnold, and Lewis Hall. Now, Lewis Hall is, of course, out for the season, so he's kind of rotting there at the moment and is probably something I need to sort out at some point, especially when you look ahead to game week 30, which is on screen now. Now, if I optimize my team very quickly, I'll bring Trent back in and I'll bring in Mo Salah, probably for Anthony Elanga, but arguably for João Pedro. It could be either one or the other. But in my back line, I've got a bit of an issue there. Robinson would have to start away at Arsenal if I wasn't happy to start Greaves away at Bournemouth. And given that I've got double Bournemouth midfield and they've been brilliant themselves, I think I'd probably start Robinson. Now, that's obviously far from ideal, but given that I've saved that 0.7 million last game week and not even taking a hit to do so, I can actually upgrade either Lewis Hall or Robinson to someone like a Daniel Munoz. Now, Munoz has Southampton away from home, so I'll take out Lewis Hall just as an example, bring in Daniel Munoz, and then Munoz can start ahead of Robinson. Now, that to me looks like a really strong side going into game week 30. Crystal Palace have been excellent, and Munoz himself has great underlying attacking data. That 0.3 is the wiggle room just in case prices change over the next couple of weeks. And I don't really want to do it with 0.1 or 0.0 in the bank because I know that someone's going to move one way or the other and probably price me out, meaning that I'd have to get rid of Robinson or potentially have to go without Munoz altogether. Now, I've looked ahead to game week 30 here to make sure that I can fit in another defender I like, and with this route, I don't need to take a hit to do so. I think the disadvantage here is that in game week 29, of course, I will have to be starting Greaves at home to Nottingham Forest when I have double Nottingham Forest attack going up against him. So it's almost like I'm playing with 10 men. I might get a 1-pointer from Greaves, and who knows, he might get something from a corner, a header or something. We might get lucky, but it's obviously far from ideal. But it does give me a starting 11 without needing a hit. Now then, this seems like a pretty good time to bring up option number 2 on screen, which is a little bit more aggressive, and it would mean that I don't need to start Greaves at home to Nottingham Forest, as I've just mentioned. So for a hit, I could arguably also take out Trent Alexander-Arnold and bring in the likes of Gvardiol this week. Now, Gvardiol could obviously come straight into my starting lineup ahead of Greaves. Greaves can drop to the bench, giving me that little bit of cover. Now, a -4 might not be popular amongst all teams, but I think it will be more common than in most other game weeks this season. So I might be a little bit more covered than I would be in any other average game week by taking the -4. It might not punish me quite as much. And Gvardiol undoubtedly has the attacking upside. He's got good underlying attacking data, 0.25. It's very decent, and 2 good fixtures in game week 29 and 30. Now, if I bought in Gvardiol, then I can actually spend a little bit more money on that midfielder than Elanga. Having said that, there aren't too many midfielders that I can afford that I'd be happy to go with. So if I wasn't to go with Elanga, I think my next favourite would be one of a Savinho, potentially to triple up on Man City at home to Brighton and then taking a chance against Leicester. But given that Man City midfielders are all sharing minutes a little bit at the moment, I'm not fully confident on that as a punt, and I'd be much more likely to go with someone like a Gibbs White perhaps as an alternative to Elanga in that midfield. Now, again, whether or not that's even an upgrade is fairly debatable. His data is ever so slightly better, but same fixture, same team, and you're not really getting much additional benefit than you would have from Elanga anyway. Regardless, if I wanted to go with someone like a Gibbs White, I could. And if you, in your situation, had a little bit more money in the bank, you could look at someone like a Jarrod Bowen, for instance, who was my initial poster boy for that midfielder replacement until I got priced out fairly recently. So let's, for argument's sake, say Gibbs White comes in instead of Elanga, Gvardiol comes in for Trent. Let's move that forward to next week, because this week looks pretty good. No doubt about it that Gvardiol is an upgrade on Greaves, but for a -4, is it a massive upgrade? I'm not so sure that I'm that confident of a clean sheet or an attacking return that he'll definitely outscore him by 4 or more points. And then when you get to game week 30, that Munoz transfer is already mapped in, which is fantastic. I've still got that 0.4 in the bank, given that I didn't use up all of the spare money from the downgrade of Trent to Gvardiol. But Gvardiol starts at home to Leicester, which is another good fixture and a chance for attacking return, a chance for a clean sheet. And in the midfield, again, I've got a bit of a benching dilemma. I've got Gibbs White currently on my bench ahead of João Pedro, but one or the other needs to get benched. So again, a bit like with Elanga, I've got that benching dilemma. And I'm pretty much the same as I would have been with option A in this scenario, except rather than having Trent at home to Everton, I've got Gvardiol at home to Leicester. Now, which one of those scores more points is fairly arguable. There's not really much in it necessarily, but Trent's attacking data is slightly better than Gvardiol's, although more weighted towards assists. And I'd say if in this game week they're fairly level pegging, last game week, it's Greaves plus 4 points versus Gvardiol with that -4. So I need to decide pretty quickly this week whether or not I believe for a hit, Gvardiol can outscore Greaves, but then also match Trent at the very least in game week 30. Now, given that I don't really have any value tied up in Trent, that itself isn't a massive issue for me. But for that -4, I'm not so certain that Gvardiol definitely outscores Greaves, because he would need to either get a clean sheet or an attacking return that week to outscore him by 4. And then Trent could just go and explode against Everton because his attacking data is very good and he could beat Gvardiol anyway. So maybe it makes more sense not to go ultra aggressive and go with the less optimal Greaves in game week 29. So that brings me on to option number 3. Now, option number 3 includes Haaland yet again, but rather than compromising perhaps on having a cheaper midfielder, I could go for one that has a great fixture and great underlying attacking data in Bruno Fernandes. Now, I'll bring him in rather than Gibbs White now, and just have a look at how much money I'd need to save elsewhere. 1.1 million isn't a massive downgrade, but, of course, it's that Gvardiol position that would have otherwise been Trent that I would need to compromise. Now, for 4.8 million in this defensive position, I could look at someone like an Ait-Nouri, who I've currently got the exact money in the bank to get to for that -4. Now, he's got Southampton away in game week 29, and then if I run it forward to game week 30, he's got West Ham at home, which again isn't too bad. So, for the next 2 game weeks, if I went with Bruno and Ait-Nouri, I do have a bit of a benching dilemma again next game week. I'd probably start Bruno ahead of João Pedro in this instance. But, crucially, I don't have the money to upgrade to a Daniel Munoz in game week 30 if I went with this route. Now, that is the massive disadvantage here, that I would need to compromise on Munoz away at Southampton in game week 30, and I'd need to take the -4 as well in doing so. So to get to Bruno, who admittedly has a great fixture in game week 29, the upside is there, but is it so much greater than the likes of Elanga or Gibbs White that I'd be willing to sacrifice a Gvardiol or sacrifice a Munoz in the following game week, all being that I take a -4 as well? So Ait-Nouri's great, attacking upside there, but he hasn't returned in an attacking sense at least, in quite a while now. And despite the good fixtures, I think it does leave me in a bit of a pickle in game week 30. Now, rather than Munoz, I could look at someone like a Wan-Bissaka, for instance. So I'll bring him in instead as an alternative. But then I've got West Ham and Wolves going up against each other. Am I really banking on a 0-0 draw in that game? I'm not so sure. And it's unquestionably a downgrade in defence when I compare it to my other two options where I'd have either Trent alongside Munoz or Gvardiol alongside Munoz. So whilst the upside is probably there in game week 29, I think it sets me back a little bit too much in game week 30. And whilst I really want Bruno Fernandes for this week, he's arguably even an outsider for a captaincy shout. I don't know if I can get there with this strategy in mind in particular. So that finally brings me on to option number 4. Now, option number 4 is the one option where I actually wouldn't be getting rid of Haaland at all. I've brought Isak back in the background there. I'll bring Greaves back into the starting lineup, and now you can see that Bruno sits there away at Leicester. I've brought him in for Palmer. But that second free transfer doesn't have to be for Aït-Nouri anymore. It can very comfortably be Trent can stay, even if, okay, he doesn't have a fixture this game week, but you can get rid of Lewis Hall instead for a Gvardiol. So Gvardiol can come in for Trent there. Yes, I would be playing a 4-4-2, and it would also include Greaves. Obviously, I wouldn't be captaining him. I'd be captaining Bruno most likely, or possibly Chris Wood, one or the other. But I've probably got options 2 and 3 as the best captaincy options. I would miss out on Erling Haaland, both at home to Brighton, who he's got a good record, 4 goals and 1 assist in his last 4, and then Leicester in game week 30, which is unquestionably a potential captaincy shout and a great standout fixture for Erling Haaland there. What it does give me, though, is the lack of a hit in game week 29, so I'm 4 points up on options 2 and 3. And it means that in game week 30, I've not only got Trent still, but I've also got Gvardiol. So I can cancel that previous transfer. Gvardiol is still in there. And I can actually look at bringing Isak back in, who would have otherwise been sold for me. Brentford at home is a great fixture after all. It's not as good as Leicester at home for Haaland, but it's not far off. It's not terrible. So I'm happy enough starting Isak instead of Haaland there. And then if you look at my back line of Gvardiol at home to Leicester, Gabriel at home to Fulham, and Trent at home to Everton, that is absolutely fantastic. That's about as good as it gets for a back line. In midfield, I've got Kluivert, Salah, and Mbeumo, Semenyo, and Fernandes. 4 out of 5 of those are penalty takers. And up top, I've got Isak with Wood. So again, 2 penalty takers there. Pedro sits on my bench. He could come in for someone else, but again, there's a bit of a benching dilemma there. But I don't even need to use a transfer in game week 30 in this strategy. I don't need to get to Munoz if I don't want to, because those defenders are all excellent anyway. So I can actually save a transfer before I wildcard with this route. The, of course, disadvantage here is that I don't have Haaland at home to Brighton or at home to Leicester, both of which are captaincy choices. And in game week 29 in particular, he was the player that I most likely wanted to put the armband on anyway. So to wrap up this video, I'll quickly summarize where my thinking is leading me at the moment. I'm most likely, I believe, to go with option number 1. That would be to bring in and captain Erling Haaland for Alexander Isak. I'd lose a little bit of value, but only 0.3 as it stands. So getting back to him would be easier than perhaps getting back to Mo Salah if I were to sell him, for instance. Salah, Trent and Hall all sit on my bench at the moment. My plan would be to get rid of Lewis Hall for Daniel Munoz next week. And rather than taking a hit this week to go for Gvardiol, I would make my peace perhaps with bringing in Greaves into my starting 11 against Nottingham Forest and hoping that the gap between Gvardiol's points this week and Greaves this week is less than 4. Basically, I'm just looking at Gvardiol potentially not keeping a clean sheet or getting any sort of attacking return for that to pay off. And then I also get to use Trent in game week 30 instead of Greaves or Gvardiol as well. In the midfield, I'm most likely to go for Elanga, giving me that 0.7 in the bank that I need to be able to upgrade Lewis Hall or Robinson to Munoz next week. And whilst it might not be the perfect 11 for this week, the fact that I'm ideally not looking at using a hit, and I'll probably have 2 of the 3 best captaincy shouts in Erling Haaland and Chris Wood, I think I'm relatively well covered off. And I do like Elanga as a fairly high upside differential in game week 29. He then goes up against his old club Man United in game week 30, so I have a sneaky suspicion he might be quite handy in that one as well. As always, let me know what you think of those transfer plans going into game week 29, and if you've got any questions or ideas of your own, feel free to drop them in the comments below, and I'll try and get back to you before the game week 29 deadline. In the meantime, if you could leave a like and subscribe to the channel, that would be greatly appreciated, and I'll see you as I lock in my team selection in the next couple of days on my channel.